Paramedics, what's the most fucked up thing you've witnessed while attending an incident? Emergency medical technician here, not a medic. This one fucked me up for a bit and makes me a much more cautious driver. Some teenagers with Mustangs decided to race each other down the highway at 1 o'clock in the morning. End up losing control at insane speeds and initially bumping each other, sending the car in the right lane off into the trees. Driver somehow survived and was evacuated out in critical condition. Car in the left lane went over the guardrail median and head first into a Jeep, then caught on fire. We got on scene and found the now extinguished, burnt mess of the wreck. Passengers of the Mustang were just carbon stacks. No bodily or facial recognition whatsoever, just charred masses of what used to be people. The driver of the Jeep was severed in half, torso hanging out of the driver's side window, legs still by the pedals and organs everywhere in the seat. The worst part was the driver of the Jeep was just minding his own business, driving along to wherever he was going. All because some kids decided to be idiots. His life was over in a split second. There was a guy doing laundry or cleaning his apartment when he dropped a bottle of bleach. The gallon container landed perfectly square and shot the bleach straight up into his eyes. I've seen more gore and things of that nature, but I think of that guy every time I see a gallon of bleach. Just recently we were called to an incident because the patient had troubles with his legs, both of them swollen. The male nurse caring for him called us. The thing is, it was not his only problem. I swear to God, you have noticed the smell of rotten flesh all the way down to the ground floor from the 4th floor. This guy was sitting in a chair for shitting, not sure what it's called, for 2 weeks straight. He was even sleeping in it. He told us that's the only way he stayed mobile in his flat. We had to convince him to come with us, and we tried to lift him onto our chair. While lifting, he started bleeding. This dude was nearly one with his goddamn chair. We had to call the fire brigade so we could remove the fucking thing. After we saw what his backside looked like, we knew a dermatology wasn't nearly enough. This man got a full-blown decubitus, the sickness you get when lying for too long on the same spot. He had a ring-shaped open wound, and his skin was all red and looked inflamed. To this date, I have never seen anything like this in my life before, and the smell is worse than you could imagine. A 9.1.1 call was sent to us as ambulance-level overdose, and the dispatch said that he took 4 tabs of acid instead of the prescribed 1.we arrive on scene, and the dude was so out of it that he pulled his left eye out with a fork. My driver vomited upon sight. The worst part, he stepped on it because he thought it was a cockroach. So not me personally, but my grandfather, who was an emergency medical technician prior to being a firefighter, had some horrible stories to share, but one always stuck out to me. He was on a late shift on a dark, rainy night in Fresno, California, when they got a call about a hysterical man in a residential area, walking around covered in blood. When my grandfather had got there, the man was sitting on the curb in a trench coat, very much in shock, and not responding to questions. As they checked him, he noticed he was naked underneath the trench coat but had no wounds to be found, making no sense of why he was covered in so much blood. My grandfather noticed that the majority of the blood was coming from his pocket, so he opened it up, revealing a human heart. The story went that the man in the trench coat and his gay lover had a home invasion that ended in one of the men's hearts being cut out of his chest, then sending the other off into the night in shock. My grandfather sleeps so well too, I don't get it. A paramedic friend of mine told me a story about a couple who were both handicapped and in electric wheelchairs. Neither could walk at all, and they could barely move their arms. One night, the guy was sitting in a woolen sweater, and he was smoking. Before finishing his cig, he got tired, and his head tilted down and ignited the sweater. When the medics arrived, he was dead, and crispy as grilled pork skin. The lady told the medics that she had helplessly rolled back and forth between the sink and him, getting a cup of water at a time and tossing it on him. Uncle was a paramedic in the 80s, and after a few drinks at a family party, he told us his worst story. Got a call that a guy got hit by a train near an old bridge in my town. When him and his partner arrived, they found the top half of him at about 15 feet away from the tracks and his lower half nowhere in sight. Turns out the guy crawled a few feet before dying at the scene. They found his legs in the water a few hours later. My uncle doesn't tell stories at family dinners anymore. Not paramedic, but used to volunteer as an emergency medical technician aide during high school. We had a call where a guy got kicked in the face by a horse once. Half of his face structure basically collapsed. It was hella scary since I just started maybe a few weeks earlier. The patient was really nice and tried to joke around though. I would have passed out if I were him. My riding instructor used to wear her wedding ring on her middle finger instead of her ring finger. The first time I was ever injured by a horse, while we were waiting for my mother to come get me, she told me the story of why she does that. As it turns out, she was thrown from a horse into a tree, and it tore her middle finger off in the process. Got caught in the reins. All alone, she had to pick up her severed finger, collect her horse, walk back to the house, and call for help. Ring hides the scar. Not me, but an instructor when I was taking emergency medical technician training. A convertible had flipped. Yeah, I'll never get a convertible because of this fear and skidded down the road a ways. Both the woman who was driving and the child in the car seat had half their heads ground away by the sliding car. There were 2 very clear and distinct streaks of blood and brain down the road. That was the day she said she decided to be an instructor instead of on-call paramedic. I'm a cop. Responded to a wreck where a guy was doing donuts in a gravel parking lot. He was showing his son around in his Jeep. He hit a bump and rolled the Jeep onto the roof. Neither were wearing their seat belts. Kid had to sit there with his leg pinned under the B-post next to his dad whose head was crushed under the dash. He was there at least 20 minutes. Still remember that kid asking me in the back of the ambulance if his dad was dead. Guy fell onto a toilet roll holder, pierced his eye straight into the back of his skull, even carefully moving him. You could hear it scraping the inside of his skull. Worked with a guy who is a paramedic. He said the worst thing he has ever seen was when they got a call from a guy's elderly, handicapped mother. She was unable to walk or leave the house, and he lived in the basement unit and wasn't answering the phone. Paramedics show up for welfare check and the unit is spotless. No signs of break-ins or foul play. They search room by room until they hit the bathroom, where they found him dead, naked, in a pool of blood. Turns out he had a bowling pin bolted to the floor in his bathroom that he used to stimulate his prostate. He lubed it up, squatted down, slipped, and it ripped his anus open. He was suctioned onto the thing and wasn't able to get himself up to call an ambulance and bled out on the floor. Not a paramedic, but operating room nurse. Not really a fucked up gory one, yet more extremely sad and fucked up story. About every month we get the same patient, a woman in her 30s. She was heavily molested and abused as a child. She is still suffering from this, and as a consequence of the molestation and abuse she sometimes has the sudden urge to mutilate her vagina and surrounding area. She tried to cut of her labia, put glass in it, a knife in her anus, you name it. The area around her vagina is also extremely scarred. Last time I asked her if she wanted to hold my hand while waiting for the doctors. She started crying. I almost broke down and started crying too. Had a homeless man come up to my rig while I was posted in Santa Monica. He was complaining about a terrible headache radiating from the back of his head. The necrotic stench coming from him clued me in on some kind of lovely surprise awaiting me. Checked the back of his head and sure enough found a 4-inch diameter wound, infested with maggots, with cranial bone visible. Suffice to say I did not finish the rest of my burrito bowl. My neighbor is a firefighter emergency medical technician. I had to tell him to stop sharing stories. But here's one anyway. Girl ran over her boyfriend with a car, he got stuck underneath, and was scraped down to nearly nothing on the pavement for about 2 miles. Like a bloody piece of chalk, my neighbor told me. Like many others, I am not emergency medical technician, but I have first responder training in a forestry industry setting. In a job I was supervising, I get a short radio call for distress by a lumberjack, so I head out to the scene and arrive before anyone else. The dude was conscious, forehead on the steering wheel and with entrails all in his arms and some on his feet. Not able to move the guy by myself, I reclined the seat to tilt him back and did a quick inspection. Thankfully his chainsaw only cut the skin and muscle of his stomach and no entrails were damaged. Then, with latex gloves from a kit, I carefully put all of his inside back inside and used a water bottle to clean the dirt on his guts that were on the floor. Just one little length of gray-purple intestine, thankfully. Then I used a clean gauze, a clean plastic shopping bag and duct tape to keep his insides inside as the helicopter evacuation came to get him out. After he got evacuation I checked his GPS. The tough guy walked almost 1.5 kilometers with his entrails in his arms, back to his truck to radio for help. Obligatory, not an emergency medical technician, but I was told this story from a visiting emergency medical technician for career day in high school years ago. Guy gets a call out to the shittier part of our town by the local police. They arrives to find a guy tackled by 5 cops with both of his feet and half his shins missing, yet still somehow resisting. Apparently the guy was on meth, ran from the cops, fell over some train tracks just as a train was coming. Train cut off both his legs from half the shin down. He got up and continued to run on the bloody stumps until cops tackled him. Drugs. Not even once. Was a night shift pediatric emergency room tech. Had a 17-year-old girl who got shot in the face via shotgun at close range dropped off by some people in a car, who sped off before they could be questioned. She was alive, but her entire face looked like ground meat, and she had no eyes or nose. Despite this, as long as you kept telling her what was happening, she would stay calm, but panic when the room was silent. I was a volunteer emergency medical technician for a bit as I was exploring options for college, as before I wanted to do meteorology, I wanted to do medicine. There was a notorious four-way of a road and a major route where accidents happened all the time. One time we were called to an accident of a car versus a motorcycle. People in the car were fine, a little banged up, but nothing too serious. Dude on the motorcycle was a different story. I still ask myself how it happened, but he was sitting on the curb with his right eye sort of loose and half dangling. Dude had no idea aside from asking why his vision was different. When they say shock is a hell of a drug, they mean it. Ooh, yeah, also the eye goes pretty far back into the head. I attended a house call where an elderly couple had attempted to surgically treat what they thought were hemorrhoids. What the husband actually had was a prolapsed rectum and not your garden variety piles. He had convinced his wife to cut the piles out. What she actually did was cut off his rectum with a kitchen knife. There was blood on the ceiling. The rectum above the dentate line is relatively insensate, which is why she managed to get that far without him passing out from pain. Patient died of abdominal sepsis the next day. Thank you for watching this video to the end. Write in the comments below the video if you have similar stories. And also be sure to subscribe to our channel to not miss new super interesting videos, and I suggest you watch our other videos.